Talk about is, I don't know if anybody's ever got a topic like this before. You throw away as many slides as you keep. I learned in 1995 when I arrived here, I gave a talk at the Arkansas Cattlemen's Convention. 3 months after arriving, and alienated half the people there because I put in a couple of slides about breeds. And that's when I learned in Arkansas you can't talk about politics, religion, or breed type. So those slides are gone. We're not going to talk about those, okay? Thought about talking about grass-finished beef. Boy, there's another sore topic. And I determined that what we were going to do is talk about things that hopefully we can do, okay? So management practices that may impact. And the reason I say may is because we do pretty good. And we're going to talk about the research that's out there. So what we're going to talk about first is we're going to talk a little bit about castration, something we all have to do or do, how, when, and what. We're going to talk a little bit about weaning. We're going to talk about some backgrounding. That's a new term for me. It's still a stalker phase for me. And then we'll talk a little bit about implantation and wrap it up. I want to talk about castration. It's estimated that about 90% of the cattle in the United States are knife castrated. This is going to be the biggest issue, welfare issue, over the next 5 years. Get ready. Okay? And pain mitigation. So we want to talk about time of castration. This was a study recently published in Journal of Animal Science. I found it kind of interesting. In this case, they used Holstein bull calves. Thank goodness they're castrating those. I got working on a dairy as a 16-year-old, got a really healthy amount of respect for a Holstein bull. I'll take a Brahman any day. So we had non-castrated or intact male bull calves. They took some at 3 months of age and they used banding, latex band, and then at 8 months of age they used knife castrate without any analgesia or anesthesia. And I'm going to put in a little bit of performance just to point out a few things. That the average daily gain of the bulls obviously were a little better, and the feed to gain or feed efficiency were a little better for the bulls than the steers. We would expect that. If we look at the carcass data, all right, no misspelled words. We'll notice that bulls were definitely heavier at slaughter. They produced a heavier carcass. They had a higher dressing percent. Those that were castrated, though, at 3 months had a lot more fat. We would expect that. Bulls obviously had a lot more lean than this group down here of the castrated at 3 months of age. They also had more bone. But what I want to point out is these castrated calves that were at 3 months had more marbling. That's what IMF is intramuscular fat. Those that were castrated at 8 months still had more marbling than our bulls. So castration and timing of castration will impact the overall quality grade and possibly the palatability of those animals. If we also look at this, when they did this trial, Warner-Bratzler shear force increase, that's a mechanical measure of tenderness. But if you really note that the sensory panelists noticed a more intense or a tougher beef product when they consumed it on the bull compared to our castrates. I still don't know why the lower number, by the way, is I guess. Anyway, bulls and the castrated at 3 months were a little more juicier, but they all had the same amount of beef flavor. So what I concluded out of this study was pretty simple. If I can castrate them at 3 months versus 8, I get a little higher quality product and maybe some palatability advantages. This is where you're going to see. All right, this is going to be the growing concern. It started about 4 years ago in the pig industry, and we're now going to see it come, and it's looking at ways to mitigate the pain response. So one of the studies, and this is a study out of Dr. Powell's lab here at the University of Arkansas, and where they took bull calves, they knife castrated them either within 48 hours of birth, okay, or at weaning at 214 days, and they did it with or without oral administration of meloxicam. It is a prescribed NSAID, so you can't get it over the counter. Started giving it 1 day before, the day of castration, and 1 day after. I just wanted to point out that the meloxicam raised this weaning. This is after they were castrated and weaned. There was a 56-day weaning phase before they went into a fall or a winter grazing system, and then they went into the feed yard. And so this would be somewhere in that neighborhood, 260 days roughly after those were castrated. So the NSAID actually got that average daily gain of those calves back up. I use this because this is one of the few that you're going to see some carcass data, and we collected this. And I just want to point out that these were pretty good cattle because they were all high choice cattle. And so if you really look, whether they were castrated at birth or at weaning really did not impact the quality in this case, the cutability and the quality of those carcasses. Nor did the addition of NSAIDs make any improvement or have any detrimental effect on castration on beef production or composition and quality. So what we're really looking at when we're looking at an NSAID is how that animal recovers quickly. Another study, Repening, it was recently, they did 20 bull calves at about 336 days of age. So we're entering in the feed yard. They used either knife or banding castrated. And in this case, they used what they refer to as a pain mitigation system, or not. And in this pain mitigation system, first there's an anesthesia. And in this case, they used what they call a ketamine stun. It actually has xylazine, oh goodness, I can't remember all of them now, I'm sorry, that's injected into 10 mils is injected into the spermatic cord and 10 mils in the scrotum. And it's an incision where you insert the needle and then you draw it back slowly. So you get in there. Also, they used a topical block with a 2% lidocaine, and that was prior to castration. Also, they used an IV injection of, I'm not even going to try it, I'm from Oklahoma, that's a big word. An NSAID, how about that? They injected an NSAID for 3 days post-castration to reduce some of the pain mitigation standards. Now, there is no carcass data on any of these pain mitigation studies with the exception of the Brown study, but I just want to point out that really and truly there was no impact on live performance between knife and banded, and with the exception of feed intake, where those that seem to get the pain medication ate a little more, which is a good thing, especially after castration, so there's positive results. While I'm at it, I might as well talk about some research that Dr. Beck and Dr. Powell and Dr. Kegley have recently done down at Hope Research with something that's very, very experimental. In fact, it's not even out on the market or close to it. And then this was Paul, get me right, it was about a 3 mil, 2 mil? 2 mil injection directly into the testicles. So 1 injection in each testicle. One of the things we noticed is we got the calves through the chute. I actually worked cattle. Okay, I didn't work, I just kind of pointed. I'm really good at that at my age. And, but anyway, you would inject the calves, let them out of the chute, and they go right back to nursing the mom. Okay? We also had a knife castrate as a positive control, an intact male. We only had 2 intact males. And this was trial, we measured testosterone, scrotal and testicle thickness, and I think body weight gain. So it's just a preliminary trial, but I had to show these results. Average daily gain wise, there was no impact on average daily gain. I would point out that testosterone, the only thing that had testosterone at the end of that 90-day trial was the bull. But the best part was the size of the testes and scrotal circumference, or scrotal thickness. About 0.4 of an inch in thickness compared to the bull, which was about 1.1 inches. Okay? And what's really neat, and is the graph on how those decline. So this product actually causes the testicle to degenerate. We did a trial in pigs, and it was pretty amazing. So this is something to look forward to down the line. I want to talk a little bit about early weaning. It's not something that I'm just going to tell you guys right now, hey, let's go out and wean everything in 100 days, okay? But I think that sometimes it's something we can do, especially when grass is a little short, feed's a little high. We've got to figure out a way to maximize our returns on our inputs, right? So one of those ways, and I was one of those people, I've got to be honest, when I was delving into this, I've been anti-early weaning most of my career. My father was a livestock extension specialist for 30 years. He didn't believe in it, and so what does that mean your son believes in? If my daddy said it, it's law. But in this study, that after they weaned them either at 103 days or typically at 203, after they graze, they put them in a feed yard. The only advantage you get is we found that these early weaned calves in this study out of Ohio State actually were more efficient during the feedlot phase than the normal wean. Well, so what's that do? Well, interesting enough, take that early weaned animal, comes off 100 days before, he ends up being the exact same steer as if you traditionally weaned him when treated the same.
I'll accept that percent choice.
Yeah, that's, I tell you what, if I can get above 75%, we got win-win, especially when the national average is under about 55%.
The FG, what is that?
That's feed to gain, sorry, feed efficiency.
It took more than 5 less pounds?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So, ma'am, what were those figures? What was B and what was that? Like
Oh, it just means there's statistically difference. I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
It's all right.
No, I was looking at the bar graphs.
Yes, ma'am. This is average daily gain, and this is feed intake. Sorry?
The F to G, is that 5 pounds or over 5 pounds of feed?
Yes, ma'am. It's 6 pounds of feed per pound of gain. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, man.
That's not really that uncommon on a poor.
1 pound a gain?
Yeah, I've seen them higher. But in a good feed yard, this was rolled, by the way, they use rolled corn and rolled oats. It was a 50-50 concentrate side blend. Not the best quality of. Yeah, you got to be careful. Sometimes they don't feed in Ohio like we do, or they do in Texas and Kansas. Meyer study, this was a study out of Illinois. I put this in here because I wanted to show that at early weaned, at about 230 days of age, the early weaned had higher average daily gain. But one of the things you notice, a normal weight seems to beat them all the way until we get out to 307 days of age, right before they were slaughtered, which they had the same. The problem is the early wean had larger carcasses, heavier carcasses, but what I liked, had increased marbling. And if you look at percent choice, here in this case we have 57 versus 37%. I said about the average is about 55 in the nation today. So if I get 75, I'm the happiest guy in the world, but if I get anything above 55, I'm making bonus, but 37, I'm gonna lose some money. Okay, I can't take those discounts. And when we look at tenderness, there was a slight numerical advantage, but it wasn't statistically significant. But in early weaned and some other studies have shown there appears to be an advantage in palatability. We go back to the Ohio State study, and I found this one interesting for 2 reasons. In this case, they had a second trial. They castrated at 93 or 103 days. In their early weaned, did I say castrated? I'm sorry, weaned at 93. In those early weaned calves, they either fed them 100% concentrate with a 12% diet, 100% concentrate diet with 16% crude protein, or they increased the amount of roughage in that diet. So they fed a 90% concentrate or a 60% concentrate diet. Those that were normal weaned at a traditional time at around 205 days, those calves were either they were grazed, but they were either offered creep feed or without creep. Okay? Got all that done. And what they found, and this is a huge table that means nothing. Okay? It's a huge table to show you that there is no difference between the early and the normal weaned calves. The lone difference, and this is for Shane, the lone difference is the percent choice between creep-fed and non-creep-fed calves. Now again, that might be statistically different, but I'm above that 75% choice. I hear ching-ching in my pocket, okay? In fact, if I got 100% choice, I might be buying dinner.
The difference is that cow, early weaning on that cow, she builds up her body score much better.
Right, right.
Because you get better calf next year.
You bet. Well, I mean, as long as we don't get her too fat, you know, we run into that issue. And being from Southwest Oklahoma, we've had some pretty rough times over the last few years. And I've seen some cows that, you know, just milk down too long. In fact, gosh, where was I? A couple of months ago. I was in Texas, Southwest Texas, and I thought it was a bull about to mate the cow until it started nursing. And I felt sorry for her. That bull was lifting her a good 2 feet off the ground trying to nurse her. It was pretty sad. Yeah, everything. Well, the calf was bigger than Mama. I can't believe Mama hadn't killed the calf yet. We'll talk a little bit, and this is where Dr. Beck comes in handy, because I got to be honest, I used his talk he gave a couple of years ago as an outline to help me in this area. So thank you, Paul, for writing this. But talk a little bit about rate of gain during that backgrounding period. And this was a study done at Clemson out in South Carolina. 2 studies, but they were the same cattle. And from December to April, steers were allotted randomly to 1 of 3 stocker growth rates. So they had a low growth rate, a medium growth rate, and a high growth rate. And the low growth rate gained about a ½ pound a day. The medium about 1 pound, and the high about 1.5. And to achieve these, they really didn't use much grass, but they achieved this by mixture of Timothy hay, soybean meal, and some pelleted soy hulls, as well as a mineral premix. And what I found interesting about this study was that during the stocker phase, that growth rate difference was there. If we put them in the feed yard, the lows still, but when we put them in the feed yard, we got a little compensatory gain, because the low growth rate had a greater average daily gain than those in the high and medium. But this high gain resulted in higher dressing percents, heavier carcasses, fat thickness not different, but in this case, these South Carolina cattle actually had a higher marbling score, a higher quality grade. When Susan Duckett and her group did the palatability, they found a reduction in Warner Brasseler shear, some improvement in tenderness, but an improvement in flavor. So that high rate of gain during that growing period, or what we would call backgrounding period, seems to have advantages on the palatability of the beef product that you have. Okay? In another style, we're going to take a couple of trials out of Oklahoma State where we looked at winter stocking. We either have cattle that were placed on fall or winter wheat pasture before entering the feed yard, or they were placed on dormant range grass. And in this 2003 study, found that, of course, there was actually a little better average daily gain in the native range, and they were a little more feed efficient during the feed yard. But when we look at it, wheat pasture produced a heavier animal at slaughter, heavier carcass, better dressing percent, larger loin eye area, a little more internal fat. But again, I've got a choice versus a select. And when we put it, and in this case the average is select 90, but I got a little more marbling. So there's a choice. And I was interested by this because I'd always been taught by some old feed yard guys that they didn't like calves off wheat pasture because they were a little soggy, a little soft, had a little fat on them, and they didn't gain well in the feed yard. Well, they did okay. All right? And when I was reading some stuff by Dr. Gerald Horn at Oklahoma State, he indicated that the reason for that may be that their energy maintenance requirements are lower in those cattle coming off wheat pasture than those coming off of dormant native range. Therefore, they don't require as much total energy to reach the same endpoints. So they may be a little energetically more efficient. And he's got data. Paul, did I get that right? Gerald's got data that shows that energetically they're more efficient on an empty body weight. Another study, Hersom did the same thing. He's got winter, but in this case, put them on winter wheat pasture. But in this case, he decided he'd try to grow them at a high rate, take what we learned from that study out in South Carolina, and apply it to the wheat pasture there. So he's got a high rate of gain, and all he did was stock one calf to every 2 acres. I'm sorry, I put 0.5, but I've never seen half a calf. I'm waiting on that. A low rate of gain on wheat pasture, which was one calf per acre. He achieved that. And then, the third group was grazing dormant wheat pasture, and they were supplemented with 2 pounds of cottonseed meal per head per day. Okay? And here's what they found. High weight gain, I got a heavier carcass than the low weight gain, but really and truly no difference. Now, I will point out again, these are pretty, at slight 99 and slight 90, we're at the upper end of select. We're probably balancing on that choice border. But that high rate of gain, go back to the South Carolina work and the wheat pasture, the last work of Shotes, kind of shows us that that a high rate of gain on wheat pasture has positive impacts on that final product that may have economical ramifications, right? Now, I don't want to, make any people that summer stock mad at me, okay? So if you're from Kansas or Nebraska, don't get mad at me. I'm thinking about y'all.
How would ryegrass and wheat compare?
You know what, Paul? They're about the same, aren't they? I think they are, because if you really look at them, I think nutrition-wise, they're almost identical as far as moisture, protein, and carbohydrate source. It's pretty good for a meats guy to actually come up with a nutrition question. I should leave on that one right now. I thought this was a pretty good study. Calves were summer grazed, and in this case, they looked at the type of grasses they were on. So they were either on native range, which was a mixture. They were on tall wheatgrass, blue stem, or a combination of an alfalfa, Bermuda, overseeded with this tall wheatgrass, which they called a combination pasture. And what they did was the same time they put those calves out to graze, they put another set of calves just like them in a dry lot and finished them. Quote, quote, finish. Whoop. All right? So here's what they found. These finished, boy, they gained 5 pounds a day. I'd sure like that over the same grazing period. However, they ate about the same amount. Feed to gain was definitely higher. The amount of feed per pound of gain was higher when we're grazing. But we got near anywhere from 80 to 100 pounds more carcass. Okay? Fat thickness the same, loin eye area the same, internal fat, a little fatter in your blue stem and tall. Yield grade, feed yard beat them. They were definitely fatter. But when we come down to quality grade, when we look at marbling, we see that blue stem had the highest marbling. And if you really look at it, our cattle we grazed outgraded the cattle that were in a feed yard. Okay? Now, by the way, all these cattle did go into a feed yard, even those that were quote, quote, finished after the grazing, but still, they beat them. I see select 12 for a quality grade on a data sheet. I cry. Okay? And especially if I'm looking at a $26 100 weight break between choice and select. It's not that high right now, but it could move that way soon. All right. Last thing I'll talk about real quick is implants. Talk about a kid that his first research project he ever worked on as a 12-year-old was a field trial with my father, which was implanting calves on wheat pasture. So I believe in implants. But I thought this was a great study by Bill Platter and a group out at Colorado State. They were looking at the impact of lifetime implants. When this paper came out and it was first presented, people called Bill a liar. He said, there's no way calves are getting 5 implants in their lifetime. Funny thing, I'm sitting next to a guy and he says, sitting over going, and then when he went to this hand, I got a little nervous. And he turned to me and he said, yeah, there's not 5, we do 6. Okay? So what they did was they did a neat little trial. They used 550 crossbred calves from 5 ranches in Colorado, Wyoming. And they sourced them appropriately. They had 11 treatment combinations. Okay? So they either were implanted at branding and at weaning, or during the backgrounding phase upon entry into the feed yard, and then re-implanted somewhere in that 56 to 90 days before slaughter. Okay? Now, here's what Bill found. This is the number of implants. So the 0 implants in their total lifetime, 2 implants in their total lifetime, 3 implants in their total lifetime, 4 or 5 implants. Doesn't take you long to realize that implanting cattle pays off when we're looking at growth rate, feed efficiency. Okay? So overall average daily gain, 3.1 pounds. I mean, you're getting about a half a pound per day in average daily gain. If you look at slaughter weight, I'm getting almost 120, 130 pounds more animal. All right? Those are all pluses. Carcass weight wise, nearly 100 pounds over those that don't get implanted. Ribeye area alone, sorry, that's LMA, it's supposed to be ribeye area. Alone, I'm increasing nearly 2 square inches. Okay? Pretty good numbers. Problem is, modest. I'm going to get about a $2.50 to a $5 premium for that calf per hundredweight. If I look at percent choice, 82% choice, 65, 90, those are still above that 55. Okay? Talk about it all the time, but what I say I really like, 75. Got it down there. We look at Warner Brasler, that measure of tenderness. The more implants I get, the tougher that beef gets. All right? Here's the worst part. If you look at any single point from that Platter study, he says that if the first implant is at branding, your likelihood is going to be tough. All right, which kind of beats up what I like to implant. Okay? But if you're starting at branding and you're going to do 3 or 4 implants, you could run into problems. The one that I really want to point out is this was a consumer study, and they used a little over 500 consumers to test the beef from these products. Those that didn't receive any implants, 74% of the consumers were satisfied with their eating experience. Okay? Whereas 67%. Now that's still a great number. But that tells me 37% of the folks that they tested were not satisfied with that eating experience. And that's room to improve upon. I'm not anti-implants, I'm just telling you, okay? We'll get to some conclusions. A really good study that Brett Barham and Paul Beck did, which I think is really one of the better studies that's ever been put out in professional animal science, was we took calves at weaning. They were placed in experiment 1 on cool season, annual pastures, and in experiment 2 they used warm season, perennial pastures, and we implemented an aggressive implant scheme, and what that meant was they got 4 implants, so a preconditioning period, the start of the stocker or grazing period, entry in the feed yard, and then reimplantation in the feed yard, or we delayed that implantation all the way till the reimplantation phase. Okay, so this group got 4 implants, this one got 1 in the middle of the finishing phase. If we look at this, and you can look at experiment 1, we said it was on winter annuals, summer perennials, average day, good, oh yeah, aggressive, average daily gain, aggressive wins, carcass weight, aggressive wins. Whoa, what happened here? How'd they get fatter, Paul? It's your data. Okay, somehow in the experiment 2 on the summer they got fatter. Ribeye area increased, again, almost 2 square inches. We saw that in platters. They were a little fatter. The point I want to point out is marbling and the delay was higher, still low. If we look at percent choice, 95% choice, 45% choice. That's some money differences. Oh, yeah, they were tougher. All the panelists that we used on that trial rated beef from the delay as more tender, juicier, and more flavorful than their counterparts. We only saw that in tenderness in those in the late phase. So what are we going to do? Well, let me start it in the order we talked about. Okay? Castration typically produces a fatter carcass, a little more marbling, a little more higher quality grades. It's what it's there for. Reduce aggression. I don't like mean bulls. And each year I get older, I like them even less. To a point that I don't even watch bull riding anymore because I just feel sorry for the clown. But it also is going to reduce our lean beef yields. I know that. Now, did I say anything about palatability? No, because we've got some research projects coming down the pike where we're feeding bulls to fatter endpoints and they're just as palatable. But right now, to the point, if I have to compare it to an intact male, it's more tender. I think that that's timing, but I also cannot say enough, pain mitigation is going to be the #1 welfare issue coming down the pike. And if you thought gestation stalls were a big deal 3, 4, 5 years ago, this will be bigger. Okay? Because it hits all of us. It hits every animal, livestock producer in the country. So we're going to have to, how's this affected? Well, we know that NSAIDs at the time of castration really doesn't have an impact on quality and carcass composition. We do know that there are other novel, less evasive methods of castration are being tested right now. Okay? The only problem I have with NSAIDs and with using analgesics is you and I can't use them. And I'm university and I'm supposed to teach you the right way, but I'm also an old cow kid, an old rancher kid. And I like my independence just a hair bit too. And so that's going to cause some consternation, and I can't do anything about that. If we look at early weaning, it is a viable option to produce the same type of beef animal, same quality, same composition, but it's an option, especially when I've got forage or my feed availability becomes a limiting factor, whether I'm in the beef industry this year or next. Okay? I'm not sitting here recommending everybody go out and start weaning calves at 90 to 100 days. Then you start calling me and telling me how many dead calves you got. Okay? But I think that when you've got maybe poor condition cows, what you mentioned, and I need to get that up, if I can get her off and I can still produce the same quality and kind of beef animal, that's a plus. So not only do I market the same type of animal, but there's a possibility that I can save me some money in the long run or get my cows back into condition. Grazing calves on wheat pasture prior to entry, hey, it's not a bad thing. We've been doing it in Arkansas and Oklahoma and Texas and little parts of Kansas for a long time, and guess what? It works. And it still produces a heavier carcass, shows some improvements in quality grades. Keep doing what you're doing. You're doing a great job. All right? Finally, implants are that double-edged sword for me. Cattle producer, this side of me, doesn't want to get rid of them. I'm going to use them. There's too much return. As long as I'm still selling weight, there's too much return. But the meat science side of me says I got to be careful of how many and how aggressive I'm going to go. Yes, Paul?
One point I wanted to make about that study, those cattle on the stocker phase implants didn't gain very well. We managed them for a low amount of time.
Right.
Whenever we redid a study where we had either low gain or high gain, the big decline in marbling
Was in the restricted, the restricted gain. I'm sorry.
So if we implant, we need to be sure those cattle are going to gain weight, or else we will hurt.
Right. And it's something that Paul and I spend a lot of time on the phone and in person talking about is really and truly, there's some theories a guy named Robbie Pritchard at South Dakota State has got stuck in my mind. and that is there is a lifetime energy need of the animal. And sometimes when we do management practices, which we've done the year before, we've done any time in the past, we drop that animal into a negative energy balance, which could have lasting effects later on down the road. In the case of Robbie uses a point where he had calf, he weaned the calves, thought he had 4 feed yard pens available at South Dakota State because they were moving cattle out the day before to go to slaughter, and only 2 pens moved out. Truck broke down. So he had to wait to clean the pens out, and the next slaughter date he could get was 2 weeks. So he took those calves, weaned them on corn stubble with a supplement. So those cattle lost a little bit of weight on corn stubble before they went in the feed yard. He will tell you that the calves that went straight in the feed yard right after weaning were in their 28-day step-up program to a full concentrate diet, grade like in the 80s, choice, no yield grade 4s. But for some reason, those 2 pens of calves that went into the stalks lost a little weight before they went back in, 28-day step-up period, finished. They had nearly half the percent choice as the others, and they had almost 20% yield grade 4s. Okay? So I guess where I look at it is I'm not a fan of compensatory gain. It's because it's the composition of the gain that matters. And what we typically see in animals that have gone into a negative imbalance, and you get that compensatory gain where, yay, I'm gaining 10 pounds a day on air. This is great. What we've learned is that goes into liver weights, that goes into rehydrating the gut, all the vital organs. And when it starts, for some reason, they start putting down a lot more bark in the wrong places. Okay? So you end up with a little fatter animal that's not as high quality. Okay? But I've said all this. With this said, probably what I would try to avoid is maybe 3 or fewer implants in the lifetime of that animal. And as Paul said, if you've got some cattle out on, and in that case we restricted gain to what? 1 pound a day versus the ad libitum group. They need more energy. They probably need a little more protein to use that implant. Okay? And so I think that's one of the keys to understanding that. Okay? With that, okay, it does not like the last slide.